to Gimel Sivan, Echad B'Sivan. Yesterday was the last day of the Yemei Tashlumin. Chag HaShavuos, yesterday was Shabbos, Kodesh. And of course Shavuos was on Sunday, so if Shavuos is a week, it goes from Sunday to Shabbos. Pesach is 7 days, Sukkot is 8 days, and Shavuos is a day. We also have 2 days Shavuos, even though you don't really need 2 days Shavuos, because you don't want to separate. But in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, they had 7 days to bring the Karbanos. That's why all of last week, including yesterday, we did not say Tachnun. We didn't say Tachnun because it's the Yemei Tashlumin. In times of the Beis HaMikdash, Yidden brought the Karbanos. If they couldn't bring them on Shavuos itself, or they couldn't bring them the day immediately after Shavuos, they had a whole week to bring them. So the Rebbe, when he talked about this, so the Rebbe made this into one of his Yom Tuvs. You know, the Rebbe had this Yom Tevim that no one knew about, the Rebbe Bashafen. Zayin Cheshvan was one, and of course Yud Beis Sivan was another. The Rebbe made Fabrengens Yud Beis Sivan, and the way the Rebbe sort of left us to believe, Shavuos continued for him until Yud Beis Sivan. To tell a story, I think the Rebbe even told a story, but to tell a story that the Frierdike Rebbe after Shavuos, a day or two after Shavuos, his secretary, Rabbi Yossi Paltiel, as they called him, went into the Frierdike Rebbe to discuss business, financial things, askonis, whatever the Rebbe was busy with. And the Frierdike Rebbe's comment to him was, Ich bin noch nicht herab vom Berg. I haven't climbed off the mountain yet, and you're bothering me. Ich bin noch nicht herab, I haven't come off the mountain from Matan Torah, and you're bothering me already with Vodab Gashmim. The Rebbe led us to believe that Tishrei lasted 2 weeks after Simchas Torah, 2 whole weeks. Simchas Torah is Chav Gimel Tishrei, and Tishrei has 30 days until Zayin Cheshvan, and a whole week after Shavuos, till Yud Beis Sivan was a Hemshach of Matan Torah. And the Rebbe's chap, I mean, there's so many details, but one of the more, the original details was that he didn't only translate the word Tashlumin from paying a debt. You know, comes Yom Tuv. There's a mitzvah say to bring 3 karbanos. Shalosh pam b'shana, Yidal kol zechorchas bnei adnad Hashem. 3 times a year, there's a mitzvah of going up to the Beis HaMikdash. And even though midiraisa the chi was only on the men, but the pashtas they went mishpachas, they went families, men, women, and children. And there was a special halacha of linas laila. You had to spend 1 night in Yerushalayim hotel. You didn't have to spend the whole Shavuos, the whole Pesach, the whole Sukkot in Yerushalayim. When you brought your karbanos, you couldn't go home that day. You had to sleep a night. 1 night you had to sleep in Yerushalayim. There was sort of a kind of a kviyas to it. So tashlum means to pay. If I didn't bring it on the right day, I bring it the next day or the day after. But the Rebbe added that tashlumin is meloshein shleimus. If I already brought the korban, but the korban was not brought b'shleimus, so spiritually speaking, I can be mashlim, not only complete, but make whole and perfect. And I like to add the word peaceful. The korban which I have brought. And the Rebbe talked about it in the light of Matan Torah. Right? The Rebbe gives us the Torah, and we receive the Torah each year on Shavuos. Spiritually speaking, this happens again. And like it says in Tanya, each year it happens in a higher madrege. So the Rebbe presented it in such a way that until Yud Beis Sivan, not we still have a chance to be makabel the Torah. The Torah that we received, it could receive more fully, more wholly, more completely, more healthily, more thoroughly. So that was yesterday, Vimizak. That was the end of Yemei Tashlum. And yesterday there was no shir, so I'm mentioning it this morning. And now begins the summer. And the Rebbe always on Shavuos spoke about a number of things. One of the things the Rebbe spoke about every Shavuos was ChiTaS, Chumash, Tilim, and Tanya. And of course we would add Anan Nene Basrei, the Inyan of Limud Rambam. Whether you learn 3 prakim a day, you learn 1 Perek a day. And if you cannot learn Rambam, you learn the Sefer HaMitzvahs. And the reason the Rebbe spoke about it on Shavuos was because Shavuos is connected to all 3 contributors to ChiTaS. Moshe Kibul Torah Misinai, Moshe got Torah from the Eibishter on Shavuos, which is Torah, which is Chumash. And especially since there is an opinion in the Gemara that Moshe Rabbeinu was taken out of the river, the Nile, on Shavuos. But there's a machlokes if the year Moshe Rabbeinu was born was an Ibiyar or not, 2 others. According to the Shita that Moshe Rabbeinu's the year Moshe Rabbeinu was born at 2 others, he was born in the first Adar. So he's born Zayin Adar Rishon, you have the whole Adar Sheni, and the whole Nisan is already 2 months. And the Pasuk says, Vatispane, she hid him for about 3 months, Kishleishes Chadashim, approximately 3 months. So if he was born in Zion Adar Rishon, he was taken out of the river the Nile, Beizir, as they state, Beizir, which was the birthday of the Rebbe Marash. But according to that shita, that it was only one Adar, so 3 months from Zion Adar is Vav Sivan. And of course, it says in the Chumash, Vatikra Shmoi Moshe Kimen Amayim Ishisiyu. Moshe Rabbeinu, the Gemara says, had 7 names. The name that the Chumash uses exclusively is Moshe. Moshe got the name Moshe from who? From Bas Pareh, Basya Bas Pareh. She named him Moshe Kimen Amayim Ishisiyu because she drew him out of the water. And we know that getting a name is a shleimus. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have a bris. Moshe Rabbeinu was Neilad Mol. He was born with a bris. You have to assume that his parents were from a Yidden, and they went to ask Arav. I mean, Amram was the Gadol Adoir, and they knew you have to make a Tafas Dam bris, but they didn't name him Moshe. They named him Avigdor, or Tuvia, whatever the name, Tuvia. If they say ChiTaS, it's Tuvia. But the name Moshe, which is the only name by which the Chumash knows him, was given to him on Zvov Sivan, when Basya Bas Pareh pulled him out of the river the Nile. And of course, when you give a person a name, you have the whole ChiTaS on it, that when you give a person a name, even though that is their name be'etzem, right, the name of a person the Eibishter gives, because the name of the person has to do with the soul of the person, or with the relationship between the soul and the body, as it were. But when we name our child by that name, so the Rebbe brings always from the Arizal, that parents have a nevuah, parents have a nevuah ktana, a ruach hakodesh, to giving the name, which is why the Rebbe, as a rule, shied away from choosing names. When people used to ask the Rebbe, what should I name my child? The Rebbe would say, it says in Kitzvei Arizal, that parents are given the nevuah, how to name the child, and that the Rebbe suggested that the parents should choose the name. There were exceptions, of course, actually many exceptions, but this was the rule. That the Rebbe, so parents give a name. So the name you have from before. But when the parents give it, as they say in Yiddish, Zeirufen dos areis, they call it out. Like you have in Chumash, the Alter Rebbe brings it in Tanya, so Perek Lamed Zayin, Vayikra. Vayikra means to call. But Chassidus teaches, Vayikra doesn't mean to call, it means to call out. Something that's already there, hidden, is brought forward, is revealed, is brought out when the name is used. And this is also true when you repeat a person's name. Which is why it says in Hilikas Sfarim that when a person faints and you want to bring the neshama, I just learned the Maimed this Friday, and you want to bring the neshama back into the guf, you do it by calling them by their Hebrew name. Because the Hebrew name has to do with the neshama. And it has to do with the neshama, which is on a level which is completely higher than the guf. So that even when the life of that neshama, as it relates to that guf, is completely departed, because the person has fainted, when you whisper their name, you're calling back such a deep level of the neshama, a level of the neshama which is completely above the shaykhs to the guf, and you can sometimes be zeicha and call the neshama back out, and that the neshama should be mislabish again in a guf. So when you're giving somebody a name, and when you use that Hebrew name, you're literally calling out the neshama. So Moshe Rabbeinu had 7 names, and these were Shmaya, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, Shmaya sheyikale b'lashon hakodesh, the name of Moshe Rabbeinu, like it says in Chumash and Bereshis, Hu Shmai, it was his name, meaning it revealed the muhus, the substance, the essence of Moshe Rabbeinu. But until the name is used, it's hidden. And when the name is used, you're revealing that potential, you're revealing that koyach, you're bringing out that possibility. So Moshe Rabbeinu's name, Moshe, which is the exclusive name by which the Chumash calls him, he got on Vav Sivan. So it's connected to the neshama of Moshe Rabbeinu, not just the fact that Moshe kibul Torah miSinai, but according to this shita, that he was taken out of the river the Nile on Vav Sivan, this date is connected to the neshama of Moshe Rabbeinu. And of course, we know the ChiTaS. It's really Kabbalah, and it's brought in ChiTaS that Moshe Rabbeinu was from Elam HaMachshava. Moshe Rabbeinu came from a world of thought, which is why he was not able to speak. And it's a whole Pella, Misan Pella, Adam, Moshe Rabbeinu B'chlal was able to talk. And to be the Eibishter's mouthpiece. Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm going to give you the ability to talk. Halai anoichi havaya. That from the madrega of anoichi, Moshe Rabbeinu gets the ability to speak. And this is represented by the name Moshe. Because Moshe means, min amayim ishisiyu, I drew him out of the water. So it's explained in Kabbalah and it's developed in Chassidus. Mayim means alma de iskasia. Water means ein safe, higher than Atzilus, Kesed. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama was above words, from the madrega of machshava. And when Basya Bas Pareh said, "Vatikra Shmoi Moshe," she brought this koyach out of Moshe Rabbeinu, And with this koyach, Moshe Rabbeinu got the Torah and he gave it to us. So Shavuos is connected to Moshe Rabbeinu in more than one way. So the Rebbe always spoke about Chumash. And Shavuos is the yard site of Dovid HaMelech. So Dovid HaMelech's name is Yisroel. Dovid compiled the Sefer Tehillim. The Tehillim is a contribution of 10 people. But most of the Sefer Tehillim is Dovid HaMelech's own. And in addition, Moshe Rabbeinu was the Ma'asef, he was the Malakat, he collected the Tehillim. And he organized the Tehillim. The Tehillim is his. And on Shavuos, Dovid HaMelech Batzeres Meis Dovid. Dovid HaMelech passed away on Shavuos. And the understanding is that he passed away on Zayin Sivan, the second day Shavuos. How do you have 2 days of Shavuos in time of the first Beis HaMikdash? There's more than one answer to that question. The simplest answer is that year, Nisan and Iyar both had 29 days. And Shavuos does not have a day in the month. Shavuos is 50 days after the second day of Pesach, or 50 days from the first day of Pesach. And so David, like it says in Kapitel Lamites, the first payday that we say on the 7th day of each month is Hadieni Ad Hashem Kitzi. David HaMelech tells Hashem, tell me when is my end. Hadieni Hashem Kitzi Amidas Yama, I want to know when I'm going to pass away. And the Eibush told Moshe Rabbeinu, Ein L'Megal Ne'La'Adam, the Eibush told David HaMelech, Ein L'Megal Ne'La'Adam V'Itav Ragav, a person is not told his end. So David HaMelech asked at least Hashem should tell him which day of the week, and the Eibush told him that it was going to be on Shabbos, and David HaMelech passed away on a Shabbos, which was Shavuos. And then of course Yisroel Ba'al Shem Tov, who is the father of Chassidus, and the Torah Shebeksav of Chassidus is the Sefer Tanya Kadisha. And the Rebbe always would say that even though the Tanya was written in the Dor Shlishi, but it's just like before the Eibishter gave the Torah to Yidden. Yidden already learned Torah. Adam learned Torah, and Neach learned Torah, and the Avis not only learned the Torah, they did the mitzvahs, and the Shvatim learned Torah. Me'elam, Le'Paska, Yeshiva, Me'avesena b'Mitzrayim. Yidden and Mitzrayim never stopped learning Torah, even though the Torah was given later. So al derech zeh, you have Torah Chassidus before the Torah Shebeksav Chassidus is written by the Alter Rebbe. And the Baal Shem Tov also passed away on Shavuos. Baal Shem Tov's yard site is the first day of Shavuos. Not the second day of Shavuos, the first day of Shavuos. And so B'meile, the Rebbe always spoke about ChiTaS, always. Chumash, Tehillim, and Tanya. Because Shavuos is connected to all three of the sources of the Chumash, Moshe Rabbeinu, Tehillim, Dovid HaMelech, and Tanya, which is the Yisroel Ba'al Shem Tov, Chassidus Chabad. And of course, we all add the union of Limud HaRambam, which is the Takon of our Rebbe, right? The ChiTaS is really a Takon of our Rebbe also. The Frierdike Rebbe introduced it, but the Rebbe made it household. The Rebbe stark in them gekocht. I heard from my father and from others, when you went into Yechidus as a Baruch, the Rebbe asked you if you learned ChiTaS. And if you didn't, the Rebbe would not give you any other Hira. And you went back in the next year, the Rebbe said, did you start learning ChiTaS? If you said yes, then he would give you other Hiras. If you didn't learn ChiTaS, okay, so now you start learning ChiTaS. ChiTaS was the first halacha by the Rebbe. When Bachrim, even Chassidische Bachrim, went into the Rebbe to Yechidus, the Rebbe asked him if there were Nizar in the Shleisha Shiurim of Chumash, Tehillim, and Tanya. So Shavuos, there was always a Sikha about ChiTaS. And of course, there was also on Shavuos always a Sikha about Chinuch. First of all, because the whole union of Shavuos is Chinuch, because of B'neinu Erevim Ba'deinu, as the Rebbe used to say the Lashon, that when the Medrash says, when the Eibush wanted to give Yidden the Torah, he asked for an order, a guarantor, and they promised him the world. The Tzadikim and the Nevi'im and the Aveis Ha'elam and the Talmidei Chachamim, and the Eibush says, nope, until we set our children, B'neinu Erevim Ba'deinu. And of course, anybody with any Seichel understands that when Yidden said, B'neinu Erevim Ba'deinu, they were not just saying, we're giving you our children. We're committing to raise our children. In other words, in the B'neinu Erevim Ba'deinu is included, Shir Amales Esa'eni El HaHorim. I didn't teach the Rebbe's Kapitel here. We only have classes on Sunday, but I taught it online. And I taught it in Shul, in Empire Shtibel. And one of the Mishtatzim of the Shir is a big Machanech, and he couldn't get over it. It says in Medrash Yalkut Shemene, Shir Amales, Shir Lamales, Esa'eni El HaHorim, El HaHoirim. I turn my head, my eyes, to the mountains, El Hahoidim, to my parents. And the end of the pasuk, Me'ayin Yavayezri, where the person says, I have no help, and I need the Eibishter, depends on what kind of parents you have, you understand? If the Hoidim are parents where they're supposed to be, then Me'ayin Yavayezri is not a question, it's a statement of fact. That when my parents give me ayin, So then when your parents give you a chinuch, but the chinuch is menasaf l'chutz, the chinuch is only a nechitzayin dika level. So the child got a chinuch, but he walks away from the chinuch saying, I don't have enough. And the teretz is, Ezrim Yem Hashem. But if Shir Amalis es ein el ha'irim, that parents are machanech their children the way parents can and must and should, and we committed to it at Har Sinai, we committed to it thousands of years ago. So then Me'ayin Yavi Ezi is not a question, it's a statement of fact. From the ayin, from the pintele, from the deepest point that our parents invested in of, Yavi Ezi comes our help, and Ezrim Yem Hashem is not an answer to a question, it's an interpretation of a statement. Vos made Me'ayin Yavi Ezi, Ezrim Yem Havai Eis Shemaim V'Oretz. And the meaning of the words Eis Shemaim V'Oretz is a Mekendurk in the Welt. You understand that our connection to Hashem is not only in Atzilus, but it's in Shemayim V'Oretz. In this world, we could serve the Eibishter. So that's the title of the Rebbe's capital of this year. Yaakov Shemeni, Ez Shir Lamales Es Ein El HaHorim El HaHoirim. So the Eltonim, which is Inyan HaChinuch. So Shavuos, when we said to the Eibishter, us parents and now grandparents and great-grandparents said to the Eibishter, this means that we committed ourselves to be madech, to be machanech ois hodem and unsere Kinder, as soll sein Yidden, und ehrliche Yidden, und chassidische Yidden, and befeidish yeshnei amecht. We don't raise our children to be like everybody else. We raise them absolutely to be different. And somehow we figure out, we find the strength not to raise them different and embarrassed, but to raise them different and proud, to raise them different. And Yisroel Azan Sheba Umes, Yidden have the necessary correct proper chutzpah, not to let the world dictate to them how they're supposed to look and how they're supposed to act and how they're supposed to think and how they're supposed to feel and what's supposed to make them feel good about themselves and so on. So the Rebbe always spoke about Chinuch HaShavuos every year. But of course then there's the additional component of the fact that we're approaching the summer, and the Rebbe was beside himself. The Rebbe was so disturbed by the 10 and 11 week break. The Rebbe couldn't make sense out of it. The Rebbe could never come to terms with it. The Rebbe adopted it by introducing the idea of Gan Yisrael, like the Rebbe said, in Droisne das a camp, in Evenike das a yeshiva, outside it's a camp, but inside it's Temchet Tmimim. But the Rebbe was deeply disturbed by the fact that children didn't learn Torah a whole summer. And it's only in America. I mean, this is only in America. Most other Western countries, maybe Canada also, they have a 3-week break in the summer. The truth of the matter is, if you'll add up, I think it's 270 days. A school year is 270 days. 207 days is the time of a pregnancy. I think officially a school year is something like that, 270 days. It's not that in other countries they learn more days, but they break up the breaks. So if you have 3 weeks in the winter and 3 weeks in the summer and 3 weeks at a different time, it's not like the children get less time off, but the children are never put in a position of complete prikasol, of completely throwing off a yoke. You must remember that in America, there's 300 million Americans. Let's say there's 30 million children. I think that's a pretty accurate number. Maybe I'm wrong. For 10 or 11 weeks, most of them have no schedule, no structure, and no supervision. The parents are both working, and in many cases full time. And parents cannot afford to, there are camps. But the camps are for Geis Hashirim. Remember, public school is free. You don't pay for Chinuch in America. Not that public school is the best thing in the world, because Chas v'Shalom, Shem Elikim Lei Taskiru Lei Yisham Al Picha, you're not allowed to mention the Eibishter's name. And we all know how the Rebbe feels about this fact that we're raising children Nachman al-Aslan on the Eibishter. Without the Eibishter, the Rebbe spoke when he spoke about the moment of silence. The Rebbe said if you'll do a statistical study, you will see as a matter of fact that the rate of violent crime in America has gone up since they took the Eibishter out of the public schools. That's what the Rebbe said publicly at a Fabrengi. So it's not that the Rebbe loved the public. At least they're in school, there's somebody watching them. And when you have children and you leave them frei, they get into trouble, not even wanting to get into trouble. They throw off every yoke. They throw off every responsibility. And they even throw off the basic inutius, basic human self-respect, the idea that we are created b'tzelem Elokim, in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And push it for self-respect, for no reason other than self-respect. There's a certain tzoyim, there's a certain fence, there's a certain containment in how the human being behaves. And when you give children all this time off with no structure, no supervision, What do you want from the children? And the Rebbe would lament this till his kishkish came out. And of course, Lubavitch makes camps. And they attract many Jewish children from all over America who a whole year go to public school. In the summer they go to Gan Yisrael. And for many of these children, this is the Yiddishkeit for their life. But remember, for every Jewish child, there's how many Goyish children? 20, 30, 40, 50, 100? And the Rebbe really, really protested the 10 or 11 week summer. And this is one of the themes of Chag HaShavuos. I'm not going to say that he spoke about this every year. The first thing, Chinuch, he spoke about every year. No doubt about it. But the second thing he spoke about quite often in my years in yeshiva. I mean, I remember the Rebbe, every Shavuos, the Rebbe, during the Farbrengen, would raise this issue. That B'chlal people need to have fences, need to have Yiras Shamayim, you know? When the Rebbe made the Tzivos Hashem, how did he explain why he's making Tzivos Hashem? How did the Rebbe explain why he's making Tzivos Hashem? What did the Rebbe say? The Rebbe said he's making Tzivos Hashem because children lack Kabbalah Seil. Children lack the idea that when someone tells you to do something, if they're older and they're above you, you have to listen without chalvos, without asking why. The Rebbe didn't make it as a fun club. It's supposed to be a fun club, but the foundation of Tzivos Hashem is Tzius, Folgen. When the Rebbe spoke about the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach, so there's all kinds of names for the different movements that have sprung up lately in the last 35, 40 years since the Rebbe started talking about it. But what was the Rebbe's mishpat? What terminology did the Rebbe use when presenting to the world the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach? The answer is Ayin, Reyev, Ezen, Shemas. And sometimes the Rebbe would actually say the third part of the Mishnah as well. Every sikh on Sheva Mitzvahs, and I grew up listening to these sikhs. This is my golden ayorim. This is my yeshiva years. Ayin Reya, an eye that sees, ve'ezen shemas, and an ear that hears. And sometimes the Rebbe would say, v'chol ma'asecha b'sefer nichtavim. Everything that you do is recorded in a sefer, and zeh sefer tel de sodom. And when a person comes l'mayla, he's not going to have his drinking buddies or his club of exclusive members. He's going to meet the Eibishter alone, and the Eibishter is going to say, Ata, Osid, Lita, Din v'cheshben. What did you do with your life? Like the famous story with Alter Rebbe, that he told a goy, an Eina Yehudi, a goy, that the meaning of Ayeka is, when Hashem told Vayimel Adam Ayeka, Hu gefinstazach, where are you? So the Alter Rebbe explained to him that you have lived this many years, and this many months, and this many weeks, and this many days. And the Eibishter asks each one of us, where are we holding in fulfilling the purpose for which our neshama came into this world? The Rebbe made the campaign of Sheva Mitzvahs on the foundation of Yiras Shamayim. And this is incredibly sensitive and important for American youth. I've told this to you a number of times, and I find this idea very, very compelling. Reb Zalman Gurari, alav hashalom, was the principal of the Lubavitch Yeshiva, of the younger grades in the beginning. Reb Zalman Gurari was a big chassid and a big lamdan. But he was a man of gvura. He was a very tough person. He wasn't a tender soul. He was a very strong, I'm not saying he was a bad person, but he was a very tough man. And he was the principal of the younger grades. And he asked the Frierdike Rebbe many questions, and the Frierdike Rebbe used to put his answers in writing, even though they were in the same building. And these, I have a whole collection, I have a whole file of these letters from the Frierdike Rebbe to Reb Zalman Gurari. They are, you could develop a whole curriculum of Chinuch based on these 2-3 pages. I'll be happy to send them to you. Short little letters. Reb Zalman Gurari asks a question, the Frierdike Rebbe answers him, and sometimes the Frierdike Rebbe initiates. The Frierdike Rebbe's involvement in the Chinuch of the boys here in those early years, you could mamish build a whole philosophy of Chinuch based on these few letters. And like I said, I have them someplace on my computer, I think. And I will if you ask me, send me a WhatsApp or email, I'll send it to you. And one of the letters is where he asks the Frierdike Rebbe about the boys playing ball. In Europe, playing ball was like Avodah Zarah. It was treif, chazah treif. But American boys shouldn't play ball. It's like not being American. So the story was that Zalman Gurari would catch the boys playing ball, handball on the side, which is where we're standing. This was the side of the building then. And he would take the balls, he would take a knife and cut them up. The Rebbetzin Nechamadina went to the store and she bought a collection of balls. If she saw that the ball was confiscated, she threw them another one. And Zalman Gurari would come back and say, who's the millionaire who has all of these balls? He would confiscate the second ball. And she threw them, this like gave the one on. It's a true story. A lot of people told this to me. So he asked the Frierdike Rebbe about the boys playing ball. The Frierdike Rebbe said, you must let them play. It's America. The kids have to play. My grandfather, learned in das. You're talking in the 20s and the 30s. And his whole life, his whole Yiddishkeit was, he called him Mr. Mendelovich. He didn't let him call him Rabbi. He made das. He was Adam Gadol. Mendelovich. And my grandfather told me that when he was in the Mesifte, so there was a boy in his class who got a good cup and got learned. You're talking now 1930s in America. The difference between us and them is so be'ein arech, and not in terms of erlichkeit, in terms of how we look at what it means to be a frum Jew. So there was one bacher, he had about Lenin, he would take a learn a lot, and when it came recess time, he went into the base of Medish and sat to learn. My grandfather had Spielkis. My grandfather was a hot brand, a firebrand. I mean, he was not a stealing kaz. I was a Lebedika kid. And one day, he figures, comes lunchtime, all the boys go outside to play. They played stickball on the sidewalk. From what are those things called? A manhole to a manhole. There was first base, there was home plate, and there was second base. We did it on Crown Street. They did stickball in Williamsburg on the sidewalks. And you needed a ball and a stick and a manhole. You had to run outside, and then he made a game, and the kids played. So my grandfather goes into the base of bed, and 2 minutes into the recess, Mr. Mendelovich pokes his head in. Sterren, what's TST do? What do you? I became a maspet. He said, "Guy, shoyna loise gas." He threw him out of the bed. Go outside. Alle mischen gas na loise guy mitten ball. All your demons come out in the playing ball. He was a real mechanic. Alle kicked him out. Alle mischen gas. Go outside and play. Get it all out and come into base medicine I mensch. But the Rebbe said to the Reb Zalman Gurari, you have to let them play ball, but they need monitoring. Now today they need monitoring. They shouldn't beat each other up. And they shouldn't bully each other in bed. The kids can be so verbally abusive. What the Rebbe wrote then, 70, 80 years ago, was Shalayitzaku kailos mishunim. American children are very fly. And one of the symptoms is they scream like animals. And the Rebbe said they're not supposed to scream like that. It's feral. It's unbecoming of a human being. You're a person. In America, that kind of hispashtus is a rite of passage. The proof that I'm American, that I can be frei and will. But that's not chinuch b'chlal. It's not even chinuch for a goyish child. It's certainly not chinuch for a Yiddish kind. There needs to be a matzah. A person has to have containment. And it's not like the psychologists will call it suppression and neurosis. It's called dignity. It's called self-control. It's called not every emotion I feel do I have to let out every time I feel it. Medav zayin mensch. Dav zayin mensch. And this is a part of chinuch, and this is one of the things that gets corroded when children go unsupervised. They become tzivildevit. At first it's just free fun, but it gets into their character. And this character is the opposite of a ben adam, and it's certainly the opposite of a Yid. So the Rebbe spoke every year on Shavuos about Chinuch, no question about it. And often he lamented the summers and the kinder sein frei. Children need to have fun and children need to be entertained, but children need to have discipline. They need to have order. They need to have control. It's negea benafsham mamish.